In this session of reviewing GitLab Basics documentation, I'm reviewing the document titled Start Using Git on the Command Line. Introduction says, if you want to start using Git and GitLab, make sure that you have created and or signed in an account on GitLab. The first thing I'd suggest there is, and without having read too much of the rest of the document, this, as with similar content within the GitLab Basics heading, suggests that we're getting an introduction to the basics of GitLab itself, whereas this document talks about start using Git on the command line. So it's a little confusing. Are we talking about GitLab Basics or Git Basics? So that is a little confusing. It's also seems a little minimalist, to say the least, to say make sure that you have created and or signed into an account on GitLab. To start using Git on the command line, yes, you have to have created a GitLab account. Well, see, in this, again, this is where it gets confusing. To begin using Git, you just need a Git repository or a Git host, whereas what we're talking about here is having created an account on GitLab. So again, we've got that double meaning and confusion around whether this document relates to GitLab or Git only. That I think really needs to be clarified early on. The second title says open a shell. Depending on your operating system, you will need to use a shell of your preference. Here are some suggestions. I'd suggest that if as the title suggests, this document is titled, targeted at users of the command line, they're already going to have a shell, or rather, they're already going to have a terminal available to them. So I don't know that it's necessary to talk about opening a shell, or rather talk about potentially downloading one. So yeah, I think we could probably remove that altogether. The next title is check if Git has already been installed. I think it would be better if perhaps stated as a prerequisite. So again, if we're talking about starting using Git on the command line, that presumes that you already have it installed. Whereas here we're checking if Git has already been installed. I think we could reasonably put that content elsewhere. It's good content. We're checking the version just to be sure that Git's actually installed. Then we provide instructions on downloading it. I think we could probably restructure that content a little to make it a little bit more make it sort of more procedure style. But again, I think that content itself ought to go somewhere else. Just for a moment, to come back to the title of the document, it says start using Git on the command line. That suggests, and this is nitpicking, that suggests that there's a finish or an end to using Git on the command line. If I'm reading it correctly, what we were intending here was essentially this was, I guess, an introduction to using Git on the command line, or perhaps coverage of some of the basic Git commands. Now, if that's the case, and that was the intended, then I think we should retitle the document. Coming back to, again, what I said before at the introduction, if this document has further content about using Git itself, then it needs to be, I believe, elsewhere, because this section is titled GitLab Basics. Okay, so if we carry on, it then goes into various sections. Here we've got add your Git username and set your email. Provides some various example commands, and that information looks to be straightforward. I think it's reasonably explained. The steps are quite clear, so I don't know that there's a lot to be done here as such. That is, I don't know that this particular section needs improvement, so I think it's okay as it is. Because again, if we could determine whether this document's relating to Git or GitLab, it looks to be Git specific, in which case, this is accurate and I believe useful information. Then we've got a section, check your information. Again, quite valid. Basic Git commands. This and some of the other sections, this is perhaps where, again, it's all relating to the use of Git. The information itself, the example commands, the introductory sentences themselves are straightforward and simple, but I'd say they're very brief, and it's presented as a series of commands, but there's no context for the reader as to whether they're following these in any particular order or whether they're part of a workflow, whether they need to be done consecutively. So the information that's provided with each of these is very minimal, and on the whole, I don't know that it should be here. That is, I don't know that we should be providing an introduction to the use of Git itself. I believe that there are other online sources for Git tutorials, but if we do want to retain this information, again, I can see some of it, or most all of it, being useful. What I think we ought to do is present perhaps an end-to-end process or flow, rather than presenting the individual commands without context, but provide perhaps an example workflow in which we use the various commands, and that would, I think, provide more context to the reader as to when and why you would use the various commands. Then we come down, we've got topic, send changes to gitlab.com. Again, as per the previous example commands, perfectly valid, but without any context, I think we would need to move that content elsewhere. Delete all changes in the Git repository. Again, these commands are, I think they need more context, particularly if we're talking about deleting changes, then I think there's a chance that people could do some harm if they were using those without understanding their meaning. Similarly with unstage all changes that have been added to the staging area, undo most recent commit. So all the commands that are provided in this document are perfectly valid, but the introduction information is very, very brief. I don't think it's enough. And as I said earlier, I think it would be better if we presented this content, so along with the example commands, in an example workflow, so that people can better understand when they use the various commands, and we could more easily provide context as to particularly why they would be using them. So that's the end of my review of this document.